All right, ladies and gents, welcome to our second to last lesson in Unit 9 for microeconomics. All right, so here in the past few lessons, we've been talking about demand and supply, but we've spoken about the two of them kind of separately and exclusively, and we have graphed the curves of both demand and supply on two separate graphs. We've never put them together. All right, but as we kind of started to see in our last lesson on supply, that demand can have an effect on it. All right, so the two of them kind of do cause and effect, push and shove back and forth. All right, so we are going to define equilibrium as when supply and demand interact to determine the price. All right, so when the two of them kind of sway back and forth in order to figure out what the price is going to be. Right, because price can always change. All right, so we've got our demand 1 curve and we've got our supply 1 curve, and this point in the middle where they meet, because we're going to put them on the same graph here for this whole lesson, all right, is called equilibrium, all right, or E1. All right, so the point where supply and demand meet and interact is equilibrium. All right, and if we draw our little dotted lines over here to the price axis, we figure out that this is equilibrium price, all right, where both the supplier and the demander of things are happy and they both agree on the price. All right, now if we trace this down to the quantity axis, this is equilibrium quantity. Now, a side note, all of these green lines that you will see that kind of trace back to our price and quantity axes, if you want to draw them as dotted lines, so if my green lines to you are dotted lines, that's fine. Also, if you want a color code, you are more than welcome to grab some markers and color code. It's up to you. All right, now, if supply and demand change, though, if one or the two of them, or both, if they change, equilibrium is also going to change with it, because equilibrium is just a byproduct of where the two of the graphs meet, or two of the curves meet. All right, so ignore that little demand 2, it's not supposed to be there. All right, so if supply and demand meet here, we're going to label this E1. Please make sure that you are labeling accurately this entire time so that your y-axes are always price and your x-axes are always quantity. All right, so we're going to label this E1. Right, now, this is our normal equilibrium price. We're going to label this EP1 for equilibrium price 1 because we're going to move equilibrium around a little bit. All right, and this is our equilibrium quantity. Now, let's say that demand for this product has increased. It is going to rise to the right, and now here's our demand 2. So we've got a new place where supply and demand meet, and we're now going to have a new place for equilibrium. So this is our new equilibrium, or E2. All right, so if we trace that back to our price axis, that is going to be our EP2, equilibrium price 2. Now, look at what happened between equilibrium price 1 and 2. The change, or the shift, was that it increased. All right, here's our new equilibrium quantity. That also increased. All right, so when demand increased, so did price, and so did the quantity that we are willing to supply. All right, so that is equilibrium. That's kind of how that works, how that moves around on the graph. All right, so what happens if equilibrium is not met? What happens if the amount that is demanded and the amount that is supplied are two different things? All right, there's one of two situations that can occur. The first of which is called a surplus. All right, that's when more is demanded than is, or excuse me, when more is supplied than is demanded. So you have more stuff on the shelf than you have people who are willing to buy said stuff on the shelf. All right. And this is how this looks on a graph. All right, you've got some demand and supply, and we've marked our E1. And again, please make sure that you are labeling accurately as we go through. All right, all of the stuff up here above equilibrium is a surplus, all right? Because at any point above equilibrium on the demand graph, the quantity that is demanded, if we trace it back down over here to the quantity axis, all right, it is always going to be smaller than the quantity that is supplied over here. Okay, let's say that our numbers are 5 and 20, all right? At any point above equilibrium in terms of where your price is at, okay? Everything on the demand graph over here is never going to touch the supply curve over here, all right? So all of this, your quantity that you demanded is small. The quantity that you're willing to supply at a higher price is larger, okay? The people do not want expensive goods, but you want to sell expensive goods, all right? So anything above equilibrium, since they never meet, all right, is a surplus. Now, the second of the two situations when supply and demand do not meet, all right, is when more is demanded than is supplied, and we call this a shortage. All right, so as you can imagine, this is the opposite place of a surplus. So we're going to draw our new graph again, all right, underneath where it says shortage. Okay, make sure you are labeling correctly. I said this like 4 times, so please make sure that you're actually doing it. All right, anything underneath equilibrium, anything below equilibrium is known as a shortage. So this time, instead of our supply being too large and our demand being too small, this part underneath equilibrium is on our supply curve, as we can see. So our quantity that is supplied is going to be on the left-hand side of the quantity axis, and our quantity that is demanded is always going to be on the right-hand side. Okay, so it's always going to be larger. All right, so the quantity supplied, we've got 5 pairs of shoes at this low price, but the people want 20, okay, or there are 20 people who want pairs of shoes and there's only 5 on the shelf. All right, so somebody's going to go home upset. All right, so at any point in time, the quantity that is supplied under equilibrium, below equilibrium, is smaller than the amount that is demanded, okay, and that is a shortage. All right, so why would a shortage or a surplus occur, and how can you see it in your life? Swish it around in your brain a little bit, think about it. All right, and I hope that you have figured this out because we got a question on it coming up. All right, so what happens if equilibrium is harmful? We've talked about what happens if equilibrium is not met, but what happens if equilibrium, where it naturally sits, is not good for a producer or not good for a consumer? All right, and we have 2 different situations that can arise. All right, the first of which is called a price floor. All right, this means that equilibrium is hurting producers. All right, it's in all caps for a reason. Please write it in all caps as well. All right, this means that the government sets a price minimum above equilibrium. This will make more sense when we put it on a graph. All right, okay, here's our good old E1, equilibrium 1. It is naturally too low. All right, we have got to raise equilibrium, but we're not going to mess with demand. We're not going to mess with supply. We are only going to mess with the price. Okay, so our demand and supply curves are going to stay the same. The amount that the people want and the amount that people are willing to sell is not going to change. However, the only part of the equation that changes is the price. All right, this is an artificial equilibrium that the government is setting. They're going to set a price above equilibrium, and they're just going to set a flat price above it regardless of quantity and regardless of demand. All right, this is called a price floor. All right, it's probably a little confusing to you, but it's in the opposite place of where a floor would be on your house. Okay, it is above equilibrium. So anything that is above this price is great to sell, and it's great for producers. All right, so but please notice, if the government does set a price floor, all right, the quantity that is demanded over here, all right, on this side of the graph, at the price that the government has set, is much less than the quantity that is supplied. Okay, so there's going to be a surplus if there is a price floor. Okay, but again, this is good for producers. An example of this would be milk in the Great Depression, or maybe minimum wage. All right, so in the Great Depression, and kind of right now as well, milk is extremely cheap right now. I don't know if you noticed this, but the next time you go to the grocery store, maybe look around and see the prices of milk. Typically, a gallon of milk should run you about $3.50, $4 a gallon. All right. As of right now, milk is only $1.12, $1.15 a gallon. Okay, so the issue with that, you're like, oh, absolutely, I am definitely buying milk today. It's super cheap. That's good for you as a consumer when you go to the checkout line and you're like, man, I just stole this gallon of milk essentially. I got it for $1.12. Right? The person it is not helping is the dairy farmer in Wisconsin. All right, they are struggling right now because what used to get them $3.50 a piece now only gets them $1.12. So their profits are going to be lower. So in order to help them out and help out the producers, the government has set a price floor above equilibrium to yank it up to where it is supposed to be in order to help out a producer. So like we said, gallon of milk's $1.25, and they raise the price floor to $3.25. Interestingly enough, a Democratic senator from New York has introduced a bill in the United States Senate to put an actual congressional piece of law, piece of legislation out that says that milk is now going to have a price floor. It has not made it out of committee because I checked this morning. However, legislation like that is should be in the back of your mind. All right, so the second of these two situations when equilibrium is harmful to someone, this time it's going to hurt the consumer. All right, so we talked all about a producer. This time a price ceiling is going to hurt a consumer. And the government sets a price maximum below equilibrium. So equilibrium, essentially, if we put this on a graph and we label our E1, equilibrium is too high. All right, so you as a consumer, you're like, whoa, I do not want to pay that much for whatever this product is. All right, so the government has now put a price ceiling down, and equilibrium is too high, so we need to yank it down to where it meets the price ceiling. All right, we gotta bring it down because it's way too much. All right, so anything below the price ceiling is totally fine to charge. All right, but there's a cap on it. There's a maximum that you can charge for that product. All right, now the result of this is that the quantity that is supplied is less than the quantity that is demanded. So if you lower the price down, the law of demand tells us that the lower the price, the higher the demand. The cheaper that product is, the more willing you are to buy it. All right, so that is kind of a consequence of a price ceiling. All right, but let's say that gas is $6 a gallon. That's way high. I am not feeling it. I am not here for it when I'm at the gas pump. All right. And the Congress has decided to lower it to $4 a gallon. If they put that price ceiling down, that helps me out as a consumer. The producer, not so much. All right. And the very last thing we're going to talk about here in our video is the circular flow of economics. Basically, it's how money flows around. Right? Top is the government, to the left is households, to the right firms, to the bottom is banks. We're just going to ignore this little world thing in the corner for now, and we'll talk about it in Unit 10. All right, so as a household, you can either be a consumer or you can be a producer, and we're going to start with consumer. All right, make sure your arrows are in the correct position, okay? So if you're a consumer, I am giving over here to a business. I give a business money because I'm consuming, I'm buying or using a good or service, right? And in exchange, I get goods and services back. All right. On the flip side of that, if I am a producer, I am giving to the business. I'm giving them labor. I'm giving them my time and my effort. And in exchange, at the end of every month, hopefully I will receive a paycheck in the form of a wage or a salary. All right, let's go upwards to the government here. Everybody knows we give the government taxes, and it's a sad time in our life, but the good old government, in exchange, gives everyone services, right, like the post office or the military. Okay, all right, let's go down here to banks real quick. This is the very last thing we're going to talk about in Unit 9. All right, so a household gives to the bank deposits. You put money into the bank, either in the form of you paying back a loan or your savings account. All right, so you give deposits and interest to the bank, and in exchange, they give you loans and APR back. And the same is true for businesses. They give the bank deposits and APR, and they receive loans and APR in exchange. All right. Congratulations, people. You have survived Unit 9 on microeconomics.